You've been calling her Sophia your whole life. Maybe you found her in a theology class. Maybe in a late-night search that started with one question and ended 3 hours later with 17 open tabs. Maybe you've been sitting with her name in meditation, in prayer, in the quiet architecture of your own interior searching. And you were told that was the name, the fallen divine feminine, the wisdom figure who stumbled out of the pleroma, who descended, who became lost in matter, who waits to be restored. That's the version most people carry. That's the name that survived the centuries. But here's what I've come to believe, after spending serious time inside the original Gnostic texts. Not summaries, not second-hand interpretations, but the actual documents recovered from the jar buried at Nag Hammadi in 1945. The name Sophia may be the most important piece of misdirection in the entire Western spiritual tradition. Not because it's wrong, but because it's incomplete in a way that changes everything. Her true name, her functional name, the name the earliest Gnostic texts actually use to describe what she does and what she is, points to something so different from the fallen wisdom figure you've been handed that when I first encountered it, I had to put the text down and just sit with it. That name is what this entire video is about. I'm Daniel, and this is Gnostic Talk. Let's start with what almost everyone believes about Sophia. Because the conventional story is not nothing. It contains real fragments of the original teaching. But fragments, reassembled in the wrong order, can point you toward a completely different picture than the one the original architects intended. The standard narrative goes like this. Sophia is the last of the divine emanations, the aeons, who exist within the pleroma, the fullness of divine light. She acts without the consent of her partner, without the approval of the invisible Father. And in that act of unauthorized creation, she produces something terrible, a flawed, arrogant entity who believes himself to be the only God, the demiurge, the craftsman of the material world. And Sophia, in her grief and her shame, falls from the fullness into the region of shadow and matter below. She becomes the fallen wisdom. She becomes the figure who must be redeemed. That's the version you were handed. And here's what that version accomplishes, whether intentionally or not. It makes Sophia a passive figure, a victim, someone defined by her error and her waiting. The entire theological weight of her story rests on what she did wrong and how she gets rescued. But then I spent several weeks working through the Apocryphon of John, and I want to be precise about what that experience was like because it wasn't academic. I wasn't taking notes for a paper. I was reading it the way you read something when you suspect it contains a code you've been looking for without knowing it. And what I found in the layers beneath the familiar narrative was a figure who operates nothing like the passive, fallen feminine of the conventional retelling. The Apocryphon of John, likely composed in the 2nd century CE, is one of the most important Gnostic documents we have. It survives in 4 separate manuscript copies, 2 long versions, 2 short, which tells you something about how widely it circulated before the institutional crackdown. In it, the divine is structured as a hierarchy of emanations descending from the invisible monad. And within that structure, Sophia functions not as an accident, but as a mechanism. Her movement isn't the story of a mistake. It's the story of how divine light enters the world. The problem is the name Sophia flattens that mechanism into a character. When you call her Sophia, wisdom, you're applying a Greek philosophical category to something that originally operated through a different conceptual logic entirely. The Platonic tradition had Sophia. The Jewish wisdom tradition had Chokmah. Both of those are feminine personifications of divine intelligence, and both are fundamentally contemplative. They describe a quality, a property, something that exists in a state. But the figure in the original Gnostic texts doesn't just exist in a state. She moves. She reaches, she generates, she precipitates the entire architecture of the material cosmos, not through passivity, but through an act of tremendous, dangerous, creative force. And that act has a different name. Before we continue, there's something I want to place in your hands. We've gathered the forgotten texts, the ones the Church sealed away for 17 centuries, into a single guide for those who feel the pull towards something deeper. Because whether we speak of the archons, the demiurge, or the divine spark, one truth remains. This knowledge was never meant to be lost. This is for anyone who senses there's more to this reality than we've been told, and who's ready to remember it. You'll find it in the link in the description below, or you can scan the QR code right here. I'll give you a moment to do that. Here's where it gets cosmically significant. In several of the earliest Gnostic sources, Irenaeus of Lyon, writing around 180 CE in his treatise Against Heresies, reports this directly from the Gnostic teachers he was trying to refute. Sophia carries a second name, a name that predates the cleaned-up, philosophically domesticated Sophia that later tradition preserved. That name is Prunicose. Irenaeus mentions it almost in passing, as if it's a minor detail. It is not a minor detail. Prunicose is a Greek word, and the translations you find in most scholarly sources render it as something like lustful, or the licentious one, or sometimes the lewd one. And if you stop there, if you take the translation at face value, it sounds like an insult. It sounds like exactly the kind of label a hostile bishop would apply to a feminine divine figure he wanted discredited. But stay with me, because the word's actual etymology goes somewhere much stranger and much more important than any of those translations suggest. Prunicose derives from a Greek root connected to forward motion, specifically to lurching forward, to throwing yourself ahead of your own balance. Some scholars, and I spent a considerable amount of time tracking down the minority position on this because the minority position is often where the real signal lives, have argued that Prunicose is better understood as the one who lunges forward, the one who throws herself into the abyss before the conditions are right, not out of corruption, but out of a kind of superabundant creative urgency that cannot be contained within the orderly procession of the pleroma. Now, think about what that reframes. The conventional Sophia story says she fell because she was reckless, because she overreached, because wisdom without discipline produces catastrophe. That reading is philosophically tidy. It fits neatly into a moral framework where hierarchy and consent and proper order are the supreme values. The Prunicose reading says something different. It says the figure who generated the material world didn't slip, she lunged. She threw herself forward with full creative force into the space outside the pleroma, not because she was defective, but because the light was so overwhelming, the creative impulse so total, that it could not be contained within the architecture of the divine fullness. One viewer left a comment after my video on the monad call that stopped me mid-sentence when I read it. They wrote, "What if the fall was never a punishment? What if it was always a mission?" I've been thinking about that ever since, because the Prunicose reading suggests something exactly like that. Irenaeus didn't think Prunicose was a minor variation on the Sophia myth. He thought it was dangerous. He dedicated significant space in Against Heresies to dismantling it. And here's the principle I keep returning to. When an institution attacks a teaching not because it's philosophically confused, but because it destabilizes the institution's own authority, that's a tell. That's the marker of suppressed truth. Because if Sophia is simply the fallen wisdom who made a mistake and needs rescuing, then the material world is a prison, and the divine feminine is defined by her error. That's a story that serves a very specific kind of ecclesiastical control structure. But if Prunicose is the one who lunges forward, the one who carries the light into matter through an act of violent creative will, then the material world becomes something entirely different, and you become something entirely different within it. Can't exactly build a theology of unworthiness around a divine feminine who chose to dive. Just saying. Now, here's what that version left out. The name Prunicose doesn't appear in isolation. It appears alongside a whole constellation of attributes in the Gnostic literature that collectively paint a picture of a figure operating at a completely different register than fallen and waiting. Let me take you through a few of these, because the textual trail here is specific enough that it can't be hand-waved away as interpretation. The Apocryphon of John describes the generation of the material world in terms of light entering darkness, not as contamination, but as illumination. Sophia's movement downward is described in language that parallels the movement of the divine light itself, descending through the hierarchy of aeons. The demiurge, the flawed craftsman who mistakes himself for the supreme God, is produced through her act, yes, but so is the pneumatic spark inside every human being. Both outcomes emerge from the same movement. The catastrophe and the salvation are not sequential. They are simultaneous. The Pistis Sophia, a lengthy Coptic text that probably reached its current form sometime in the 3rd or 4th century, develops this further. Sophia in that text is not static. She moves through an entire sequence of descents and partial ascents, across what the text calls the 13 aeons below the pleroma. And in each cycle, she emits what the text calls light power, a kind of radiant residue that accumulates in the material world even as she herself continues to be pulled downward. She is not simply trapped, she is actively seeding. And the trimorphic protonoia, which, I'll be honest with you, is the text I've returned to more than any other in the last year of this work, takes the argument further still. Trimorphic protonoia means the triple-formed first thought, and the feminine divine voice in that text speaks in first person from the very opening lines. She describes herself not as fallen, not as diminished, not as waiting for rescue. She says, "I am the movement that exists in all. I am the invisible one within all things. I am perception and knowledge." That is not the voice of a victim. I personally think the trimorphic protonoia is the most theologically audacious text recovered at Nag Hammadi. And the fact that it remained completely unknown to Western Christianity for 17 centuries while the Platonic Sophia myth was allowed to circulate tells you everything about the selection process that shaped what survived. Now, the trimorphic protonoia also connects the feminine divine principle explicitly to the concept of descent as revelation. The first thought, protonoia, descends into the world not to be redeemed, but to redeem, not to receive light, but to deliver it. The triple form of the title refers to her 3 descents, as Father, as Mother, and as Son, which maps, though imperfectly, onto the later Christian Trinity. But in this text, the originating form is feminine, and the descents are all characterized by the same Prunicose quality, forward into matter by choice for purpose. Here's the analogy that finally cracked this open for me. Imagine a river that flows from a high mountain source. The conventional Sophia story treats the water that reaches the valley as degraded. It has left the pure source. It is mixed with the earth. It has become muddy and slow. The goal is to return it to the mountain. The Prunicose reading treats the water in the valley differently. The water in the valley is doing exactly what the mountain source designed it to do. The descent was the mission. The mud it carries contains minerals the valley needs. The turbulence that looks like chaos from above looks like irrigation from below. You are in the valley. And what Prunicose carries into that valley is not the residue of a mistake. It is the content of a delivery. Here's where most people get stuck. They hear the Prunicose reading. The descent was intentional. The chaos was the mission. The mud is the message. And they accept it on the level of metaphor. Beautiful idea, poetic framing. But they don't push further into what the Gnostic texts actually claim happened mechanically. What did Sophia Prunicose do? Not symbolically, concretely, cosmologically, in the architecture the Gnostics laid out in careful, almost clinical detail. So let me walk you through it, because the mechanics are what change everything. In the tradition preserved in texts like the Apocryphon of John and the Reality of the Rulers, both recovered from the Nag Hammadi Library in 1945, Sophia is one of the aeons, the divine emanations that constitute the pleroma, the fullness of the divine realm. The pleroma is not a place so much as a state, a living totality of divine consciousness in perfect self-knowing. Each aeon within it is a facet of that totality, not separate from it, but distinct within it. If you watched my video on which level of the pleroma is your soul from, you'll have a working map of this structure already. Now, Sophia's movement, the movement the texts call her fall, begins with a desire. In the Apocryphon of John, she wants to bring forth something from herself without the consent of her partner Aeon and without the sanction of the pleroma. She wants to create independently. She wants to know what it means to generate. And she does. What she generates is the demiurge, the craftsman entity who goes on to construct the material world from a template he only partially understands, copying forms he glimpsed from above but has no real comprehension of. The demiurge is, in the Gnostic reading, not evil in a deliberate sense. He is more dangerous than that. He is a capable architect working from an incomplete blueprint, convinced he is the only architect that exists. This is the conventional reading of the fall. Sophia acted impulsively. The demiurge was the flawed result. The material world is his flawed construction, and the task of the Gnostic is to escape it. But the Prunicose strand of Sophia mythology goes further and in a different direction. In texts like the Hypostasis of the Archons and fragments preserved in Irenaeus's own polemical accounts, and I want to note that Irenaeus, writing around 180 CE, was actively trying to discredit what he was documenting, which means he couldn't avoid preserving it. The Sophia figure does not simply fall and regret. She descends and then works. After the demiurge creates the material world and the archons, the subordinate powers who govern and enforce its structure, Sophia enters the world herself, not as a disembodied influence, but as a presence moving through matter. The reality of the rulers describes her as hovering above the waters, her image appearing in the waters beneath. The archons see that image reflected and are drawn to it. They try to seize it. They cannot, because what they see is a reflection of the divine. You cannot possess a reflection. You can only mistake it for the thing itself. And that, right there, is the hinge point. That image in the water, that's us. That's the divine spark visible in matter, present in the material world, appearing to be inside it but originating from above it. I spent considerable time, I'm talking multiple late nights, with the original Coptic English translations spread across my desk, trying to work out what the texts actually mean by this image. Is it consciousness? Is it the soul? Is it some specific emanation Sophia deposits in matter? The answers vary depending on which text you're working with, but the consistent thread is this. Sophia's presence in the material world is not incidental. It is generative. She is not trapped here, she is active here. The trimorphic Protanoia, which I think is one of the most extraordinary documents in the entire Nag Hammadi corpus, opens with the divine feminine voice speaking in the first person. I am the movement that dwells in the all. I move in every creature. And it continues, I am the invisible one within the all. The Protanoia, the first thought, descends 3 times into the world. Each descent is more complete than the last. The third descent is into a human form. This is not a tragedy. The text frames each descent as an act of illumination. She comes into the darkness to be a light the darkness cannot name and therefore cannot extinguish. Prunicose is that pattern in its most unfiltered form. The one who leaps forward, the one who descends before the architecture of permission is in place. Not because she failed to understand the risks, because the risks were secondary to the purpose. The question that changes when you understand the Prunicose reading is not, how do we escape matter? That's the question the conventional reading generates. The question that emerges from the Prunicose strand is, what did she bring with her when she came down? What is the content of this descent? Because if the descent was the mission, then matter is not a prison. It is a delivery point. And if you are made from her image, if the divine spark in you traces its origin to Sophia Prunicose, then you are not the prisoner, you are the package. I want to pause here and make sure this lands with the weight it deserves, because I think people can hear this concept, "you carry a divine spark," and nod along without registering what it actually means in the Gnostic framework. It's become one of those phrases that floats around spiritual communities like ambient music. Pleasant, distant, not really sticking to anything. The Gnostic claim is not ambient. It is structural. It is specific. And when you trace it back to the Prunicose strand of Sophia mythology, it becomes something that doesn't just comfort, it reorients. Let me be precise about what the texts actually claim. In the Apocryphon of John, the divine spark, called the pneuma, the spirit breath, is something Sophia deposits into the material creation without the demiurge's knowledge or intention. The demiurge shapes the human being from dust, from material substance, and breathes into it the psychic element he can control. But Sophia arranges for the pneuma, the divine breath, the genuine living spark from the pleroma, to enter the human without the demiurge understanding what he has done. The craftsman builds a vessel. The vessel turns out to be more than a vessel, because it contains something the craftsman cannot account for and cannot remove. This is the Gnostic version of the Genesis story, and it is profoundly different from the Orthodox reading. In the Orthodox reading, God creates humanity, and it is good. In the Apocryphon of John, the entity that creates the physical body is not the highest God. The highest God, the monad, the invisible spirit, is unreachable by the demiurge and knows nothing of a construction this low on the ontological chain. What connects the human being to the monad is precisely the pneuma that Sophia Prunicose smuggles in. If I can use that word, smuggles, because the texts describe it as something that enters through the archons without them recognizing what it is. Now here's where the name Prunicose becomes cosmologically important rather than just mythologically colorful. Prunicose means the one who acts with urgency, the one who leaps forward, the one who does not wait. In some translations of Irenaeus's descriptions of the Simonians and the early Valentinian traditions, the word carries a connotation of boldness, even recklessness. Sophia Prunicose is the version of Sophia who could not wait for the ordered, consensual, deliberative process of the pleroma. She saw what needed to happen, and she did it. And what she did was ensure that the material world, a world that the demiurge and the archons designed as a closed system, a world with no genuine exit into the pleroma, contained a genuine exit anyway. The divine spark is that exit. The pneuma she deposited is the door the doormaker didn't know he built. I personally think this is the most theologically radical claim in the entire Gnostic corpus. Not the demiurge theory, as startling as that is, not the archon cosmology. This, that because of Sophia Prunicose's unauthorized, urgent, forward-leaping act, the material world is structurally unable to contain the human being completely. There is always a way through. Not because the system allows it. The system actively does not allow it. But because something got in before the system was finished, and the system was never able to find it. A viewer named Evander left a comment under my video, "I tried Barbello's monad call. What happened shocked me, and it stopped me cold." He wrote, "I've spent my whole life feeling like I was in the wrong place, like I was built for something I couldn't name. This video is the first time that feeling made structural sense to me. That hit me, because that's exactly the phenomenology the Prunicose reading is describing. That persistent interior sense of misalignment, not with yourself, but with the outer structure of things, is not a psychological malfunction. It is the pneuma recognizing that the container it's in was not built with it in mind. The spark knows the walls don't fit. That's not distress, that's orientation. But understanding what you carry is only the first layer of this. The deeper question is, what does it mean to live from that? Not as a concept you hold, not as a framework you find intellectually satisfying, but as a daily reality that actually changes how you move through the world. Because the Gnostic texts do not leave you with a beautiful theory and no instructions. The practice traditions that grew up around the Sophia Prunicose mythology were intensely practical. They understood that knowing you carry a divine spark and actually activating it, actually living from the level of the pneuma rather than the level of the psychic personality the demiurge can manage, are not the same thing. Knowing is the beginning, not the destination. And this is precisely where the name change from Sophia to Prunicose stops being a historical footnote and starts being a practical instruction. Because Prunicose, the one who leaps forward, is not just describing what Sophia did in the mythological past, it is modeling what you are being asked to do now. The urgency is not hers alone. It is directional. She descended with it. She left it here, for you to continue. The question the Prunicose reading places in front of you is not, how do I escape? That's the Sophia as fallen reading. The question Prunicose generates is, what am I here to deliver? What did she bring this far, through this much resistance, at this much cost, that only you, in your specific material situation, in your specific body, in your specific life, what did she bring all of that here to give? I'm Daniel, and this is Gnostic Talk, and I need to say plainly here that everything we've covered so far only earns its weight if it moves from cosmology into something you can actually live. Because this is where a lot of people stop. They find the Prunicose reading compelling. They feel the shift in the story, from fall to mission, from prisoner to carrier. And then they go back to their lives, and nothing changes, because the insight remained an insight and never became an orientation. So let me give you what the Gnostic practical tradition actually points to when you take Sophia Prunicose seriously as the operative myth of your own existence. First, the reorientation of inquiry. If the conventional Sophia reading is operating in you, consciously or not, the underlying question driving your interior life is, how do I get out of here? How do I purify enough, know enough, rise enough to leave this material existence and return to the source? The spiritual practice that follows from this question is essentially one of subtraction. Strip away the material, deny the body, transcend the ordinary, get back to the mountain. The Prunicose reading reverses the direction entirely. If Sophia came here on purpose, carrying something the world needs, then the question is not how to leave. The question is how to fully arrive. How to be so completely present in this material situation that the pneuma you carry can actually do what it came here to do. The practice shifts from subtraction to penetration. You stop trying to rise above your life and start trying to go deeper into it. Not into the demiurge's structure of it, not into the archon's management of it, but into the layer underneath that, where the divine spark is already active and already moving. I first understood this distinction in a way that actually changed my practice during a period when I was, frankly, exhausted by spiritual seeking. I'd been doing the work, the study, the contemplation, the deliberate attention to the monad, and there was something in it that felt like effort in the wrong direction, like I was trying to push a door that was designed to be pulled. And one night, sitting with the trimorphic protonoia, I read the line where the protonoia says, "I dwell in those who dwell in me, and I came to be recognized in them." Not, "I am waiting for you to ascend to me. I dwell in those who dwell in me." The movement she describes is not upward, it is inward and downward, into presence, into the material situation, into the body. Something shifted that night, and I want to be precise about what shifted, because I'm not describing an ecstatic experience. There was no light, no heat, no dramatic sensation. What shifted was the direction of my attention. I stopped looking up for something outside my current life and started looking into my current life for the thing that was already present. It was quiet, but it was definitive. Second, the reorientation of suffering. The conventional Sophia reading generates a particular relationship to difficulty. If this world is the result of a mistake, if matter is a trap, if the demiurge's construction is fundamentally hostile to your nature, then suffering is evidence. It confirms the diagnosis. Of course this is hard. This place was never meant to hold you. The response to suffering in this framework is endurance and escape planning. The Prunicose reading does not pretend suffering is not real. That's not what I'm saying. What it does is refuse to let suffering have the last word about where you are and why. If the descent was a mission, then resistance is not proof that the mission has failed. It's proof that the mission is active. You do not encounter resistance when you are going the wrong way. You encounter resistance when you are going exactly the right way, through exactly the material that needs to be moved. One viewer left a comment after my video, "I stopped praying and called the monad instead, here's what changed," that stays with me. They wrote, "I've been in the hardest year of my life, and this channel is the first place that made me feel like my being here right now is not an accident." That's the Prunicose insight landing in someone's actual life, not as consolation, as reorientation. The hardest year of your life is not proof that the mission failed. It is, possibly, the heart of the mission. Third, and this is the most practical of the three, the reorientation of identity. What you call yourself matters, not as an affirmation, not as a label you put on a vision board. In the Gnostic framework, your operative self-understanding is the thing that determines which layer of your own consciousness you are actually living from. If you understand yourself as a material creature who occasionally has spiritual experiences, you are living from the psychic level, the level the demiurge can reach. If you understand yourself as a divine spark that has taken on a material situation, you are living from the pneumatic level, the level the demiurge cannot touch. This is what changes when you stop calling her Sophia and start calling her Prunicose. It is not merely a historical refinement. It is a claim about the nature of what she was doing, and therefore a claim about the nature of what you are. She was not a divine being who fell into matter and became trapped. She was a divine being who entered matter deliberately, urgently, with full forward motion, carrying something the world needed and could not have generated itself. You are made from that act. Your pneuma traces its origin to that decision. So when the world resists you, and it will, when the archonic structures of obligation and noise and ordinary managed life try to convince you that you are fully accounted for, fully explained, fully contained by what they can see and measure, the name Prunicose is the answer. Not as a chant, not as an invocation, as a recognition, as a memory that runs deeper than this lifetime. She leapt forward. She brought the light in. She left it here. And it is not waiting in some upper realm for you to earn your way back to it. It is inside you. It has been inside you from the moment you arrived. The entire project of the Gnostic path, whether you approach it through the monad call, through the activation practices I've covered in other videos on this channel, through contemplative study of these texts, is not to acquire something you lack. It is to recognize something you already are. Stop calling her fallen. Start calling her Prunicose. And when you do, when that name lands in you not as information but as recognition, you will notice something shift. Not dramatically, not in a way that will make a good story at a dinner party. Something quieter and more permanent than that. The same shift I described sitting with the trimorphic protanoia on that ordinary night. The door you thought you needed to push, it was always a door you pull, and you are standing on the side it opens toward. If this landed for you, if the distinction between Sophia and Prunicose changed something in how you understand your own presence here, I want to know. Comment below. I carry the delivery. That's how I'll know this reached someone who genuinely felt it, not just heard it. Because that's what this channel is for. Not information, recognition.